The fly lands on a fire ant and injects it with an egg, which then grows into a pupa inside the ant, while the developing fly within them eats everything in the ant's head except the brain.
Somewhere in Israel right now, a fire ant is walking away from its own nest, and it has no idea why. It was carrying food a moment ago. Then it stopped, dropped it, and turned around as if something reached inside its skull and rewrote the map. Hours later, it falls, and its head separates cleanly from its body.
When it forms its pupa, the head of the fly, the head of the pupal fly, is poked out where the jaws of the ant used to be.
Go back to that nest and you will find hundreds more, hundreds of bodies, hundreds of heads lying beside them, everyone killed the same way. Israel has been losing this war for 20 years. What is finally turning it around is smaller than a grain of rice, and it is not on our side by accident. Who they were. These are red imported fire ants, Solenopsis invicta. If that name means nothing to you, let me fix that fast, because this is one of the most dangerous and most expensive invasive species alive anywhere on Earth. Governments have warned that a single new outbreak can cost an economy billions and take years to push back out. They came from South America, then slipped into nearly every corner of the world over the decades, hitching rides along trade routes, buried in soil, tucked into goods, hidden inside shipping containers nobody checked carefully enough. In Israel, they turned up quietly at the very end of 2005 in the Jordan Valley. Then they started to spread, and everywhere they spread, the world around them got worse. The sting of a fire ant is nothing like any ant you have met. The pain hits instantly and can last hours, sometimes days. And they never come at you one at a time. They swarm, they coordinate, they lock onto the same patch of skin and sting it again and again. For a small animal, that is often simply the end. For a larger one, it can mean anaphylactic shock, sickness, even death. People are not safe either, and a few have died. So, in the local ecosystem, these ants are not the hunted. They are the thing everything else has learned to fear. And an entire colony of them just came apart, but not all at once. That is the part nobody expected. 4 warning signs. Rewind the clock to before the corpses appeared and watch it happen, because this colony did not die overnight. It died slowly, and it died in a very strange order. At first, everything looked almost normal. Ants leaving the nest, ants returning, the usual routine. But that calm was a lie, because inside, the colony was already collapsing in 4 distinct stages, one after another. The first was the food line. It did not slow down, it stopped. In minutes, the workers simply quit bringing food home, as if they had forgotten they ever had a job. For a colony that survives entirely on what it drags in from outside, that is the first crack in the foundation. The second was the collapse spreading. Construction halted. Outside activity dropped sharply. The big worker ants started vanishing, one by one, like someone quietly switching off a factory floor station by station. The third was the strangeness. Some ants were still moving, still technically alive, but slower, disoriented, uncoordinated, like they were trying to remember how to be an ant and failing. The fourth was the leaving. Those stumbling ants wandered away from the nest, not a few steps, but for good. And every ant that left made the colony weaker. Fewer workers, fewer resources, weaker defenses, which meant even more ants lost. The loop tightened until all that remained was bodies and heads lying apart. That is not a normal death. That is a death with a script, and something wrote it. The usual suspects. So let us work the crime scene. And I have to warn you, every time you feel certain, the evidence turns around and tells you that you are wrong. Suspect 1. Local predators. Israel has no shortage. Scorpions, geckos, black widow spiders, all of them hunt tiny insects. All of them live in that same dry country. Scorpions wait at the bottom of little pits for something to fall in. At best, one picks off a stray worker. It does not hollow out a nest from the inside or leave hundreds of heads sliced cleanly from their bodies. Geckos swallow prey whole, so the ants would be gone, not scattered in piles. And spiders pump in digestive enzymes, drink out the insides, and leave dry shells and webs behind. Nothing here looks like spider work. Eliminated. Suspect 2. Poison. The motive is obvious, and ant poison is cheap to buy, so it sounds plausible until you look at how poison kills. It kills fast, and everyone at once. Ants lose control, twitch, and drop, where they Stand, corpses clogging the tunnels. But here the ants died slowly, in order, following those exact 4 signs, and most damning of all, they died far from the nest after choosing to walk away. No poison on Earth produces that. Eliminated. 2 suspects down, and we are not one step closer. If unraveling a mystery step by step is your kind of thing, subscribe to World Enigma right now, because what we are about to find is stranger than anything you are currently imagining. Suspect 3, war with a rival colony. Ants really do go to war, brutal, bodies torn limb from limb. But war leaves specific wreckage. Collapsed tunnels, stolen larvae, chaos at the entrance, and wounds everywhere. Legs, bellies, antennae, not just heads. Here there is no intruder, no chaos at the door. This colony rotted from the inside, while the outside stayed untouched, and the only damage anywhere is severed heads. Eliminated. Suspect 4, disease. This is the smartest guess of all. Ants live packed together, in constant contact, running the same tunnels thousands of times a day, so a fungus or a virus could tear through them fast. But real disease still does not look like this. Sick ants fade slowly and die inside the nest or at the entrance, heaped together. Here, again, the ants walked away first and died far from home, and no known virus makes a head detach cleanly from a body. Eliminated, which leaves suspect 5, not a predator, not an epidemic, not a toxin, not a war. Every clue points the same way. Whatever killed this colony never attacked it from the outside. It was already inside every single ant. And if that is true, the only question left is how it got in there. The tiny visitor. There is one detail everyone overlooked. Every so often, not always, but often enough to notice, a tiny fly turns up above the colony. It is so small you have to look twice to catch it, and it looks completely harmless, just a speck in the air. But the ants do not treat it like a speck. They treat it like a gunship just dropped out of the sky. The instant it moves in close, everything stops. Ants abandon their trails and scatter in a panic. Some flip onto their backs, some throw open their jaws and try to fight, but the fly is far too fast, and those jaws snap at empty air. The whole colony freezes until it leaves. Remember, these are fire ants. The species dogs, cats, even children have to stay away from. And something smaller than a grain of rice has just paralyzed all of them at once. Then, the fly dives. It touches a single ant, lightly, for less than a second, and shoots back up and vanishes. The touched ant gets up, brushes itself off, and goes back to work like nothing happened. And for a while, nothing does. But a few days later, that exact same ant starts moving slower, gets disoriented, and one day walks out of the nest and never comes back. So, what did that fly do in less than a second? To answer that, we have to go inside the ant. Inside the ant. The fly is a phorid fly, and she was not wandering. She was hunting. The female can detect a specific pheromone that fire ants release when they turn aggressive. An invisible signal she picks up from a distance. That is why the colony panicked so hard. They were not watching a scout. They knew they were the target. But knowing and escaping are two very different things. She dives, and in under a second, she curls her abdomen forward and uses her ovipositor, thin and sharp as a microscopic needle, to inject one single egg into the ant, right near the neck. Then she is gone. The ant feels nothing worth an alarm, no real wound, no obvious pain. But the clock has started. Within a few days, the egg hatches into a tiny larva. It lies still inside the body, causing no symptoms. The ant keeps carrying food, keeps building, keeps tending the colony's young, with no idea it is carrying a passenger. Then, after about a week, the larva begins to move up toward the head. And that is when the behavior starts to shift, subtly, but enough to see, a little slower, a little lost, fumbling tasks it used to do without thinking. As if something is learning to steer a body it does not fully understand yet. The larva crawls into the head cavity and eats the brain tissue from the inside. Bit by bit, it takes control, not just weakening the ant now, but driving it. And it drives the ant to do exactly one thing: leave the nest, far enough that no other ant will find it and intervene in time. That is why the strange ants always vanished. They were being led. Once the ant is far enough out, it dies. Now the larva releases enzymes that dissolve the tissue joining head to body, until the head comes away, clean and whole. And here is the part I need you to sit with. That head on the ground is not a corpse. It is not garbage. It is a house. Sheltered by stable temperature, the right humidity, and a full supply of food, the larva keeps growing inside it for another 2 to 4 weeks. Everything it needs is already there. Then a fully grown fly crawls out, lifts into the air, and goes looking for the next aggressive fire ant to start it all over again. That is your killer. Not disease, not war, not poison, not any predator you pictured. A fly smaller than a grain of rice, working from the inside, erasing an entire colony without leaving a mark, except for the heads. Brought on purpose. But there is one thing I have not told you. That fly did not show up by accident. Someone carried it there and released it beside the colony on purpose. Researchers walk up to an active colony with a small shovel and stir up a piece of it, just enough to trigger panic. The ants flood out, pumping those aggressive chemical signals into the air, which is exactly what the researchers want, because that signal is the beacon the female homes in on. Then they open their containers and release the flies, sometimes 20 or 50 in a small trial, sometimes thousands in a full campaign, while they keep stirring the nest so the ants stay exposed on the surface, perfect targets, as long as possible. Which raises the obvious question. Why would anyone deliberately release one invasive insect to fight another? For that, we have to leave Israel and go back almost 100 years, to a man who watched these flies work long before anyone thought to use them. A 100-year war. The story begins in the American South in the 1930s. A cargo ship pulls into Mobile, Alabama, and in the soil used as ballast, something arrives that nobody checked for. A small fire ant, setting foot on American soil for the first time, digging into ground that was close to perfect. Plenty of food, vast territory, a warm climate, and best of all, almost no natural enemies. Back in South America, phorid flies and dozens of other predators kept it in check constantly. In the United States, there was nothing to hold it back. The result was exactly what you would expect. Over decades, the fire ants poured across Florida, Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Georgia, attacking people, livestock, and wildlife, wrecking crops, chewing into electrical systems, and preying on native animals, in extreme cases pushing local species toward extinction. The economic damage climbed into the billions every year and kept climbing. America tried everything. Harsh early chemicals like DDT and Mirex worked briefly, but poisoned soil and water so badly they were banned. Newer chemicals killed the ants, only for them to return months later. And you cannot keep dumping poison on millions of acres forever. Then someone asked a simple question. Why has the fire ant never exploded like this in its own homeland? Because down there, it has enemies. That someone was USDA scientist Sanford Porter, who went to Brazil and Argentina and watched it happen with his own eyes. The phorid flies harassing the ants, attacking them, parasitizing them, so the colonies could never run free. He documented it carefully, and then he floated an idea plenty of people first thought was insane. Bring the flies to the United States. Convincing the regulators took years. Every fly species had to survive hundreds of tests. Would it attack native ants? Would it harm pollinators? Species after species was screened to rule out unintended damage. By 1997, the first release was approved in Florida, small and cautious. A modest Gainesville lab was turning out around 1,500 flies a day, enough for a handful of sites a month. An idea once dismissed as crazy was quietly becoming national policy. The fly factory. But 1,500 flies a day was never going to pressure millions of acres. They needed a factory, and in Gainesville they built one. The air held hot and humid to recreate the tropics the flies evolved in, because they would only breed reliably in those conditions. Then came the clever part. They brought the fire ants inside too, into trays with 2 inverted cups. To the ants, those cups were the best shelter around, so they carried their young underneath, but the cups were rigged to rise and fall on a cycle. One lifts, the ants scramble their larvae to the next. Minutes later, that one lifts, on and on without pause. The colony stayed in permanent panic, constantly pumping out the aggressive signal the females hunt by. Every morning, the newly hatched flies flew from the hatching trays into the attack rooms, spent 3 or 4 days injecting eggs into workers, and then the colonies were swapped and the cycle began again. Production climbed from 1,500 a day into the tens of thousands, shipped in coolers to colonies in the field. So, why go to all that trouble for such a tiny, complicated insect? 3 reasons. It is small enough to attack every ant, invading each one from the inside where no defense can reach. It is specific enough to cause no collateral damage. After more than 25 years of monitoring in the United States, there are 0 recorded cases of these flies attacking native ants. They only respond to the fire ant signal, and it sustains itself. Once released, the flies breed, spread, and find new targets on their own, with no need to reapply every season. Back to Israel, which brings us back to Israel. Since 2005, those fire ants have not been sitting still. They have pushed from the Jordan Valley up into the Galilee and down into the Negev, creeping toward the cities, attacking gardeners, driving pollinators off crops, and preying on baby birds and young reptiles in their nests. Outdoor life there has gotten noticeably worse. The problem is growing, and Israel knows it. Here is the interesting part. Israel would not be starting from zero because it already has something most countries do not: a large-scale insect breeding and release operation that has run for years. Its Mediterranean fruit fly program has given it deep experience raising millions of insects a week under strict quality control, with cold chain logistics, transport, and aerial releases by plane. So, the first piece of the puzzle is already sitting there. The missing piece is the law. Mediterranean fruit flies are released sterile, so they cannot reproduce and simply fade away. Phorid flies are the opposite. They have to reproduce to hold their numbers and keep long-term pressure on the ants, and that demands a far stricter, slower ecological approval process. So, for now, Israel is still in the research and trial phase, with no large release approved yet. The foundation is built. The only real question left is timing, what it achieves. So after more than 25 years of this in America, has it actually worked? The honest answer is yes, but not the way you might picture. In areas with the flies, fire ant numbers have dropped by roughly 10 to 15%. That sounds small, and if you were hoping for something dramatic, I understand the letdown. But it matters far more than it sounds, because the real impact is not in the number, it is in the behavior. When the flies show up, the ants change how they live. They turn timid. They stop foraging far from the nest. They burn energy guarding and hiding instead of expanding and attacking. Picture an army that always has to watch the sky for enemy planes. Even if those planes rarely fire, their mere presence rewrites the army's entire strategy. And as the fire ants shrink back, native ants start moving into the gaps. In places once completely ruled by fire ants, local species are quietly reappearing. Slowly, but it is happening, and the flies do not stay where they are released. They spread on their own, chasing the fire ants wherever the colonies move. By 2008, one species had spread across nearly half the entire fire ant range in the United States, and another had covered almost all of it, with no extra help from anyone. That is the whole point. Not a weapon that flattens everything, not a magic button. A hunter, small and patient and impossibly specialized, following the invader wherever it runs, day after day, with no further human effort. In a war with no perfect answer, it is the closest thing anyone has found to one that truly works. And it all traces back to a fly smaller than a grain of rice, with one egg, one ant, and one severed head lying in the dirt. So, here is what I want to know from you. Would you be comfortable with your own country releasing one invasive species to fight another, or does that cross a line? Tell me in the comments. And if you made it this far, hit like and subscribe to World Enigma. It genuinely helps me keep making videos like this one. See you in the next one.